Welcome back, listeners. Today is episode lucky number 7. I'm having a lot of fun making these episodes, and I hope you're enjoying them as well. If you get a chance, please rate 5 stars and subscribe on Apple and all your other favorite platforms. It's the easiest way to get the show out there to people who may not have heard it before. Today is going to be a fun one. The Braves have a rich history of strong performance from the third base position. We're going to talk about some of these players, as well as compare some of them in the People's Pitch segment. So, without further ado, let's get started. Alright, so as I mentioned before, the Braves have a very rich history at the third base position. It is arguably the best position for them. Of course, you could argue starting pitcher, due to people like Spahn, Mathews, Glavine, Niekro, Smoltz, etc. Maybe center field with guys like Andrew and Murphy. Maybe you want to argue right field, just because Hank played most of his innings there. All those are fair arguments, but I'm not here to argue that today. I want to focus on third base and the plethora of talent the Braves have had there. Just sit back and think off the top of your head of elite talent that have manned that position over the years. People like Eddie Mathews, Chipper Jones, Josh Donaldson, Vinny Castilla, Terry Pendleton, Bob Horner, Darrell Evans, Bob Elliott, Red Smith, Jimmy Collins, Ezra Sutton, and Billy Nash, just to name some. Wow, what a rich tradition. It almost seems that having a third baseman that is not all-star level is actually the deviation from the norm. First, I want to say that this is just an overview in a sense that it is not one of those who had a better career in the Braves uniform, but more so just a dive into the rich history that is the third base position of the Braves. First, let's look at some of the guys maybe some people may not have heard of due to it being way before our time. First, let's look at Ezra Sutton. This guy was a solid force in his day. He started for the Braves in 1878 and then 1880 to 1885 at third base. He had a solid career. Not a Hall of Fame level or anything, but solid. If you look at his standard stats, you may notice a lack of home runs. He only had 25 in his entire career. But let's not forget that homers are not everything, especially back in that time frame. From 1883 to 1885, he had a very good run. He had an OPS plus of 147, 165, and 149 respectively. If you have not listened to an episode yet that I talked about OPS Plus or do not know what that is okay. Just know that the league average player of that year will have an OPS of 100. This means Sutton average being 53% better than the league average with a stick when it comes to on-base plus slugging. He also led the league in hits with 162 in 1884. From a WAR standpoint, he had wins above replacement. He had a stretch from 83 to 86 where he acquired 16.6 WAR. That is pretty impressive peak for 4 years. Let's look at someone else now. Maybe you guys haven't heard of him. Maybe you have. Let's be honest, some of us probably haven't. It's hard to remember players sometimes from way back when, if it wasn't Babe Ruth or someone like that. But we can't forget people like Billy Nash. I also forgot about him, but like Sutton, he was very solid for the Braves. He was no Chipper or Mathews, but the guy would have been in the running every year to be an all-star in today's game. Although, I do have to say, I am talking about if the all-star selection was actually done by stats and not a popularity contest like we all know it really is. Actually, I'm going to go on a tangent for a second. I am all for fans being part of the All-Star game. I absolutely love it. It is great for the fans. It's great for the sport. However, we need to remember it is more so a popularity contest for the fans, for the starters, than anything else. The backups are chosen by players and coaches, but the voting takes place so early that it is really inaccurate to what actually happened on the field that season. We just need to remember that all-star appearances should not be used in measurements of how good someone's career or year was. Luckily, Hall of Fame voters are finally catching on to this, and we need to as well. Okay, off my soapbox. Back to Nash. He started for the Braves from 86 to 89, and by 86 to 89, I mean 1886 to 1889, and then from 1891 to 1895. Of all those years, there was only 1 year where he had less than 2.2 WAR. He had 4 seasons where he ranged from 3.6 to 5.3 WAR. To put that in perspective, Ozzie Albies had a 5.2 WAR on the Braves last year and only trailed Acuna and Donaldson, 4 positional players, and the only pitcher to have higher than that was Mike Soroka. Like Sutton, he didn't have a ton of homers, but again, we need to remember that it was part of that era. Although, I do need to point out that his slugging percentage was pretty bad, but his OBP was top tier. He only had 2 seasons that it was below 350. And by 350, I mean .350, just so we're clear, since you're not actually looking at a stat sheet here. You're listening to my voice. In 10 years with the Braves, he had an OBP of 368. To put that in perspective, Acuna has yet to have an OBP that high. This guy did it in an average of 10 years. His average of on-base percentage was 368, higher than Acuna's had yet. Next we have Hall of Famer Jimmy Collins, who was inducted in 1945 by the Old Timers Committee. He started for the Braves from 1896 until the good old century of 1900. This guy was a stud. All but one of his seasons for the Braves franchise, he had a WAR of 3.1 or higher. He even topped out at 6.9. In 1898, he led the league with 286 total bases. He also had an OPS plus of 140 that year. In his 6 years for the Braves franchise, he had a slash line of a 309 average, a 365 on-base percentage, and a 429 slugging. In 1898, he was 4th in the entire league in offensive WAR. In 97 and 98, he placed top 10 in overall WAR. In 1899, he led the entire league in defensive WAR. Pretty impressive stuff. Next, I want to highlight Red Smith. Smith started for the Braves from 1915 through 1918. He was consistent with his WAR each season, being 4.1, 3.3, 3.7, and 3.7 respectively. He had an OPS of 124 for all 4 years he was on the Braves. In 1914 through 15, he placed in the top 5 in the league for offensive WAR. In 17 and 18, he was top 10 in average, OPS, and RBIs, although you all should know by now my feelings on that stat. A fun stat is he also led the league in games started at third base in 1915 and 1916. He also had some major range at third. He was 5th in the entire league in range factor per 9 in 1960 and 2nd in the entire league in 1918. Alright, good old Bob. Let's talk about Bob Elliott. He was the guy right before the great Eddie Mathews took over, so he was probably overshadowed. I don't hear about him a lot, talked among announcers or experts or whatever, and I think he really gets overshadowed because he was right before Eddie Mathews. And I hate it, but to me that would put him as probably one of the most underrated Braves of all time. But this guy was good in his own right. He started at third base for the Braves from 47 till 51 and 1947 till 1951. He was one of the best in his 5 years for the Braves with WAR seasons of 6.4, 6.3, 5.1, 4.6, and 3.5. I know I said we should not use all-star appearances as true value of a player, but he has 3 with the Braves. He also won MVP in 1947 with a slash line of 317, 410, 517. 317 average, 410 on-base percentage, 517 slugging percentage, with an OPS of 927, making his OPS plus for that year 147. He led the league in walks in 1948. In his 5 seasons with the Braves, he averaged a slash line of 295, 398, 485, and an OPS plus of 139. Crazy good stats. That's about on par with Freddie Freeman, if not a little bit better. We aren't even halfway done looking at great third baseman for the Braves. Crazy, am I right? Alright, let's look at Darrell Evans. I think he gets a little bit more love than Elliott does, but he was definitely a good player for sure. What a great player for the 5.5 years he started at third for the Braves. He had 8.5 total, but he started for 5.5 of them. He came back in 89, but was not the starting third baseman. You can definitely see his peak to a major bell curve while with the Braves. It starts with a 1.4 WAR season in 71 and ends with a 3.1 WAR season in 75. But he had an amazing 2 seasons from 73 to 74 with a 9.0 WAR and a 7.2 WAR respectively. That's Mike Trout level, guys. Like, that's insane. He got selected as an all-star with the Braves in 73. In his accumulated 9 years as a Brave, he had a slash line of 246, 368, 426 with an OPS of 118. If you look at those numbers, it's not insanely good, but that 73 and 74 seasons, those were amazing. Next, let's talk about Bob Horner. I feel like we're kind of getting into the time frame now where people probably remember a lot of these players, which is cool. But a lot of you probably remember Bob Horner if you've been following the Braves for a long time. If not, well, here we are talking about him. And if you do know about him, let's dig in a little bit further into his stats. Although he has 9 years with the Braves, 1978, in which he won Rookie of the Year, through 1986, it is important to note that he really had 6 full seasons as a third baseman. All 6 of those years, he had a WAR that never dropped below 2 and topped out at 4.4 in 1980. Interestingly, his 82 season was the one that he got selected as an all-star. His WAR that season was 3.4. He was not an on-base machine, averaging 339 for the Braves, but he had a very solid slugging percentage of 508 for them, equaling an OPS plus of 128, and was obviously a fan favorite. Some other stats to note: he was 9th in the league for offensive WAR in 83, but only had a WAR of 2.9 overall. This is signaling why he transferred to first. Remember how I said he had 9 years for the Braves but 6 full seasons at third base? It's because he ended up transferring to first base. He was 5th in the league in batting average at 314 in 1979. Overall, solid player. Alright, now let's get another fan favorite, Terry Pendleton. He started for the Braves at third base from 91 until 1994. He started strong with a WAR of 6.1, winning the MVP and leading the league in hits, total bases, and batting average. That actually is not a combo you see very often. Typically, if someone leads in batting average, they are not leading in hits as well because they probably did not have as many at-bats as the guy who is leading in hits. It's just the way the numbers go. That is not always the case, but it usually is. After that season, he then had a WAR of 5.0 in 92 and also led the league in hits again as well, coming in second in MVP earning his only All-Star selection for the Braves, and won a Gold Glove, although you all know my feelings about Gold Gloves. But I did want to point out that he got a Gold Glove because he did get it, and I wanted to point it out. Pendleton then kind of tanked pretty hard. Now, he went from 2.4, which is not bad, it's just not MVP level, and then he went 0.1. To be fair though, he only played 77 games in 94. He also came back to Atlanta in 1996 for 42 games. Some other accolades to look at is he was third in WAR in the entire league at 91 for position players and fourth overall. He was also sixth in the MLB in OPS in 91. Pretty solid season in 91, wouldn't you say? Alright, time to move on to another top-notch third baseman. It was only one season, but man, what a good one it was. So, if you did not know already, there are two main sources to find WAR. I will dig into it more in a later episode when we dig into advanced stats more, but Fangraphs has an algorithm and Baseball Reference has an algorithm. One leans more on defense than the other, but we'll dig into that more when we have a segment dedicated just to that. So, even though they are very close, they are not the same. Baseball Reference has Josh Donaldson, that's right, that's who we're talking about, at a WAR of 6. All respect to Acuna, Freeman, and Albies, because they're all amazing players, and some could argue elite, but Donaldson led the whole team in WAR. If you look at Fangraphs, only Acuna had a higher WAR. The reason I'm comparing players here is just to give you a reference on how good his season was. It is easy to look at offensive stats, of which Donaldson had great one with a slash of 259, 379, and 521, which equates to an OPS of 900 and an OPS of 127 with 37 home runs. But he also had elite defense. He started off slow. I remember a lot of fans making crazy claims that they should start Camargo over him at the first part of the season. No offense, but if you thought that, I'm glad you're listening to my show. I am actually a fan of Camargo, as you have heard in earlier episodes, but thinking he should start over Josh Donaldson is just plain crazy. JD went on a tear once he got started though. If you look at an OPS of 127, you can see that it was really good, but not as good one as you might think. Well, you ask, why did he have more value than Albies and Freeman regardless of your source for WAR? Easy, his defense. He led the entire team with a defensive WAR of 1.7. He was the third best third baseman defensively in the league based on range factor. These metrics are impressive. Of course, Ender did not play most of the year. Ender Inciarte did not play most of the year for the Braves, so we can't say, if Ender would have played the entire year as a starter, maybe he would have been number one on the Braves, but he didn't. And Donaldson had that crown last year. This year resulted in him winning the Comeback Player of the Year, 7th in the MLB in WAR for position players, and 9th overall. Now let's talk to one of my favorites when I was younger. Let's talk about the 2 seasons from Vinny Castilla when he started at third base for the Braves. Fun fact, he started his career in Atlanta, but only played 12 games in 91 and 9 games in 92. He then was selected by the Rockies from the Braves in the expansion draft when the Rockies became part of the MLB. I'm not going to dig deep into expansion drafts today, but if you get the time, definitely look up how they work. I think it's fascinating. Alright, let's look at the 2 years he started at third for the Braves. If you did not know about this already, Vinny coming in shifted Chipper Jones to left field. Believe it or not, Vinny, even with the body type that he had, was a better defender at third than Chipper based on stats like range factor and RTOT. I wanted to bring up Vinny even though he actually had 2 pretty bad years in Atlanta. But he has the name value just to, go towards the richness of the Braves had, and I kind of want to point out some things that we're going to get to later. Vinny was an above-average player when he came to Atlanta. He had won 6 Silver Slugger Awards and had garnered some MVP votes. As recently as 1998, he had a 5.6 WAR season. By name value, it was fun to have him on the team. I was a fan of having him. However, even though the Braves were really good the years he was on the team, winning 101 games both times, it was honestly not because of him. I was a fan of Vinny as a player in general, so candidly, that is why I put him on the list. I have false memories of him. Once I took my Braves goggles off and looked at the stats, it was not really that pretty. Whew, a ton of third basemen that were very good for the Braves, and we haven't even gotten to the best 2. Let's take a break, come back, and then we will discuss them. Alright, welcome back from break. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. So, anyways, that leaves us with 2 third basemen that are widely considered to be in the top 5 to 6 third basemen of all time. This is rightly so. That leaves Chipper Jones and Eddie Mathews. At the time of this recording, a few days prior, Mark Bowman posted a poll on Twitter who was the best Braves third baseman of all time. If you don't follow him on Twitter, do it now. While you're there, follow me too, at Braves Dugout Pod on Twitter. Now for that shameless plug. Mark, if you are hearing this, I want to be you when I grow up. Anyways, this poll, the last time I checked, with 3,839 votes, Chipper leads the poll 92% to 8. And this, ladies and gentlemen, leads me to the People's Pitch segment of the week. First, let me start off by saying, like I said, they are both Hall of Fame worthy. They deserved their nomination. Top 6 of all time third baseman, no matter how you spin it. So, either way, they are both phenomenal players. But there's some serious recency bias here with this Mark Bowman poll result. That poll is seriously disrespecting Eddie. I challenge that poll and say, although Chipper is an elite player of all time, one of the best, Eddie Mathews edges him out as having the better career. I would also like to add that I grew up watching Chipper, idolizing him as a player. I collect Chipper Jones memorabilia as a hobby. In fact, my dream card is a PS10 graded Desert Shield Chipper Jones rookie card. Chipper was an absolute joy to watch and absolutely should have been first ballot Hall of Famer. So, please do not take this as trashing of Chipper segment. I want to take the recency bias out of this and look at actual numbers. Let's look at Chipper's amazing numbers first. Offensively, if you look at the key stats that the eye tends to be drawn to, you automatically think Chipper was better. Chipper started at third for the Braves from 95 to 2001. I know, he first appeared in 93, but he started from 95 to 2001. And then from 2004 until 2012. Remember, he moved to the outfield for a few years. He never had a season at third base where his WAR went below 2.3 and he topped out at 7.6. Overall, if you include his 2 years in the outfield, his career WAR was 85.3 according to Baseball Reference and 84.6 according to Fangraphs. Considering the average Hall of Famer at third base has a WAR of 68.4, that is a heck of a career. His career slash line is 303 batting average, 401 on-base percentage, and 529 slugging percentage, which equals out to an OPS of 930. He has an insane OPS plus for an entire career at 141 and ended up with 468 homers. So yeah, straight insane. Let's look at some accolades. He won MVP in 1999, which isn't even his best season. From a WAR standpoint, 98, 2007, and 2008 were actually better. Although he was first in the league from an offensive WAR standpoint in his MVP season. He got MVP votes in 13 different seasons, came in second in Rookie of the Year voting, All-Star, which again is cool but does not show true value, in 8 seasons, and won Silver Slugger twice, which is actually kind of bizarre that he only won that twice. I mean, it's pretty crazy, but either way. He led the league in offensive WAR twice and was in the top 10 7 different times. His total offensive WAR from a career standpoint was at 88.3, which equates to 25th all-time among all offensive players. What an absolutely solid career. Let's pivot over to Eddie Mathews. Eddie Mathews started at third base for the Braves from 1952 until 1966. He never dipped below a WAR of 2.4 and only had 2 seasons that were below 4.6. He had 9 seasons of a WAR of 6.5 or higher. His career WAR, including his 2 seasons in Detroit and 1 season with Houston, which accumulated 2.1 WAR over 168 games, just for what it's worth, is 96.2 according to Baseball Reference and 96.1 according to Fangraphs. He had a slash line of 271 batting average, 376 on-base percentage, 509 slugging percentage, equaling an OPS of 885 and an OPS plus of 143 with a total of 512 home runs. Leading the league twice in that category when way fewer homers were being hit. He was elected in the Hall of Fame in 1978, but somehow it took 5 attempts. He was a 12-time All-Star, had MVP votes 12 times, coming in second twice. He had 11 seasons where he was in the top 10 for position player overall WAR, 11 seasons in the top 10 for offensive WAR, and 2 seasons of top 10 defensive WAR, which is kind of key. Now, I'm just going to rip the Band-Aid off and say it. Eddie had a better career statistically. If we take away the accolades that are voted on by humans, like MVP, All-Star games, etc., and actually look at true value and output, Eddie had a better career. Let's look at WAR, aka wins above replacement. Even if you take away Eddie's 2.1 WAR away from him that he was not in a Braves uniform, and for good measure, take it away from the source that shows him having the lowest WAR of the 2 sources, that puts him at a 94 WAR. If you compare that to Chipper's WAR coming from the source that gave Chipper the highest of the 2 sources of WAR at 85.3, that is a difference of 8.7 WAR. 8.7 is nothing to sneeze at. The average starter in MLB gets about 2 WAR per season. That is 4 seasons worth of average play difference. Just for reference, Chipper was averaging about 2.4 WAR a season the last few years he played. At that rate, Chipper would have had to play 3.5-ish more seasons to catch up to Eddie, and that is not including Eddie's time not in a Braves uniform. Okay, so WAR is not the end-all be-all, sure. However, to make a statement like some people do that WAR is not an end-all be-all stat is inaccurate because it's not just a quote-unquote stat per se. It is an accumulation of multiple stats that aren't just the ones that look pretty to the eye. One area that really sticks out is defense. Even though Chipper made it look pretty, he actually was not very good with the glove compared to other major leaguers. He had a career defensive WAR of negative 3.0. Eddie actually was in the top 10 in the league in defensive WAR twice and had a career defensive WAR of positive 2.5. That is a difference of 5.5 WAR just in defense alone. Okay, let's look at something besides defensive WAR. Remember how we talked about RTOT? Eddie had a career total of 40 and only had 3 seasons with a negative RTOT. He also ended his career with a range factor per 9 innings of 3.02. Switching back and looking at Chipper, Chipper had a career RTOT of negative 22. 20 of those negatives coming from third base. Just for what it's worth, since we know he played some time in the outfield. His range factor per 9 overall ended at 2.34. At third base, it was 2.42. If I did my math right, that made Eddie's range per 9 22% better than Chipper. That is huge. 22% better. Okay, let's switch over to offense. Chipper's bread and butter, which, for what it's worth, was absolutely elite. However, Eddie actually barely edges him out there too. If you look at career OPS plus, which factors in the league average of the era, as well as environments such as hitter-friendly parks versus pitcher-friendly parks, Eddie edges out Chipper with a 143 to 141. If you look at weighted runs created plus, which stands or is also known as WRC plus, which I believe I talked about in an earlier episode, is league and park adjusted that can be used to compare players across the years. It takes all offensive categories and quantifies them by runs. Chipper is at a career WRC plus of 141 and Mathews is at 143. Just for what it's worth, it's kind of funny that the OPS of Chipper and Mathews and their WRC plus are both the same number, which is that's kind of crazy. But anyways, so again, Eddie edges him out by 2 points on WRC plus as well. It is very close, though, because if you use the plus scenario where you factor in all things considered, Chipper has Eddie with a weighted on base average of 397 to Eddie's 389. Alright, well, what about offensive WAR? I'm glad you asked. Chipper has a higher offensive WAR than his overall WAR at 88.3. So Chipper's total offensive WAR is 88.3. Okay, that's the main thing you need to know. But Eddie still has him there with an offensive WAR of 93.7. So, taking recency bias out of it, Eddie wins this battle. He was far better defensively and technically edged Chipper out by a hair offensively. He had a better career. Even if you take out his years he was not a Brave. That is in no way trashing Chipper. Chipper is not only a Braves legend, he is a baseball legend. Both players are top 6 third basemen all time, and offensively both players are in the top 35 of all time. But I wanted to point out and put out this comparison to point out that we need to be careful about recency bias. We need to take our recency bias out of it. We also need to take our Braves goggles off in the example like I was talking about Vinny Castilla. Let's not forget players just because a newer one that has been relevant has come out sooner and played more recency. We don't want to lose respect for players of the past just because they played longer ago and you didn't get to watch them. Alright everybody, that is the show this week. I hope I didn't ruffle too many feathers with the Chipper versus Eddie argument. It's been something I've been wanting to talk about for a while, and that Mark Bowman poll really put it over the edge on, okay, let's go ahead and put this information out there. Again, I love Chipper Jones, truly elite player. It was fun talking about it. I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts. What a rich legacy the Braves have had at third base. I hope you all enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to subscribe and rate on all your favorite platforms. Follow on Twitter at Braves Dugout Pod. Email at bravesdugout@gmail.com. Visit the website at bravesdugoutpod.wixsite.com/bravesdugoutpod. And check out the Facebook group Atlanta Braves Dugout. See you all next Thursday. Chop on and go Braves.